So we're going to finish our look at relationships of relevance with the last two relationships, which are conversion and contraposition. But before we get into that, let's just take a moment and review what relationships of relevance are really all about in the first place. Relationships of equivalence are also called immediate inferences because they tell us what proposition another proposition immediately implies or to which it is identical. Again, you may want to just pause the video so you make sure you've got that definition in your notes. Now, I know the relationship of obversion that we looked at in the last video may have seemed anything but immediate. I mean, some of those examples we had took a little while to figure out. And that's because we've got a little bit of an issue with the word immediate. Okay, in common language, just everyday language, we've taken the word immediate to mean fast. And that's not what it really means in logic. As we're going to see today in these relationships, they're not fast. There's some process that you have to go through. But what we mean by immediate really is automatic. Okay, once you have performed one of these relationships of relevance, you realize that a particular proposition automatically implies something else. Okay, it's just that the proper word that we use in logic is immediate. Okay, so don't think that it means fast, but it does mean that once you know something about one proposition, when you realize through a relationship of relevance, there may be something else that's automatically implied. So let's start with reviewing that relationship of obversion. As you recall, obversion applies to all four categorical propositions: A, E, I, and O. And you should remember that to obvert a proposition, you must do two things. You have to change the quality of the subject, either from affirmative to negative or negative to affirmative, and you have to change the quality of the predicate to its complement. Now, the first relationship that we're looking at in this video is conversion. And conversion applies only to the E and I propositions. And this one is actually pretty simple. To convert a proposition, you must switch the subject and predicate of a proposition. Just switch them. Just take the one and make it the other. All right, and so here we have our little chart. The categorical proposition E, no S is P, by conversion becomes no P is S, right? We just switch the subject and predicate. Similarly with the I proposition, some S is P, by conversion, just flip it around, some P is S. And here comes our little friendly kangaroo, and she says, let's try it. If the E proposition, no balls in the box are red balls, is true, then what can you immediately infer? So think about that from the conversion relationship, and the little fellow in green says, by conversion, that must mean that the proposition no red balls or balls in the box must also be true. And obviously that is. I mean, you can see that from the picture, right? No red balls or balls in the box. And then the little fellow in blue says, I get it. Let me try one. So this time the fellow in green starts out and he says, if it is true that some dogs are animals with 3 legs, then what can you immediately infer? And the blue guy gets a little hesitant. He says, I don't know. There aren't any 3-legged animals that are dogs, are there? And Logic Dragon's coming in and thinking, I don't know which is sadder, a doggy with only 3 legs, or the fact that the guy in blue doesn't get this. And so Kangaroo comes back and has to explain it. If the I proposition, some dogs are animals with 3 legs, is true, then conversion tells us that some animals with 3 legs or dogs must also be true. Again, conversion is a pretty simple one. You're just switching the subject and the predicate. Now, I want to pause here for a moment. Your book gives you a really good example of why this does not work with the other proposition, specifically an A proposition. That's the one they use. Back in 1973, there was a woman named Mary Daly who wrote a book, and she said, if God is male, then the male is God. And she was writing that to try to attack the biblical teaching, the biblical writing, where God is referred to as Father, right? And obviously Jesus was a man. And even the Holy Spirit, when we translate from the Greek Holy Spirit, we translate He. And so she was trying to attack that idea, and she said, well, if God is male, then the male is God. Well, unfortunately, that's not accurate logically, right? If start off, God is male, if you start off with that, that would actually be an A proposition. All right, that would be a universal affirmative, okay? And she's trying to switch the subject and the predicate there. And as we've seen, that doesn't work with an A proposition. It only works with an E or an I proposition. So it was faulty logic. And to be honest, a lot of people bought into it. It's another example of why logic is important, so that you can critique the things that people say. So now we're going to look at our last relationship of relevance. It's called contraposition. And this one is actually a combination of both obversion and conversion. We're going to put both of those together in what we call contraposition. So contraposition applies only to A and O propositions. You can only use this relationship with those two. And to perform contraposition on a proposition, you have to do 3 things, okay? Let's go slowly over this. First off, you have to obvert the proposition. Okay, that's the one we talked about at the beginning of the video, the one we reviewed from the last time. You first obvert the proposition. Then you convert the new proposition, the thing that you just created. All right, you will switch its subject and predicate. And then you obvert one more time. You obvert the final version of the proposition. Now, those are a lot of steps, so again, make sure you've got those in your notes, and then we're going to go on with an example. So, Kangaroo says to Logic Dragon, she says, I think we should get this straight before we try it out with the humans. And Logic Dragon says, no kidding, and this is tricky even for me. So she says, let's start with an A proposition like, all modern music is garbage. And Logic Dragon says, hey, that works for me. I love 80s rock. Bands like Stryper and Bon Jovi and, well, we get the idea there. And so she says, our first step is to obvert that proposition, right? And Logic Dragon says, right. By switching the quality of the subject and changing the quality of the predicate to its complement, we get, and Kangaroo figures it out, no modern music is non-garbage. Right? So we've changed from affirmative to negative in the subject, and then we've changed the predicate garbage to the complement non-garbage. And Logic Dragon says, I agree. It's all bad. He says, now, convert that proposition by switching the subject and predicate. And so Kangaroo figures it out, and she says, no, non-garbage is modern music. Okay, we've just converted by switching the subject and the predicate. And Logic Dragon says, now, we obvert one more time and get all non-garbage is not modern music. Okay, so we had no non-garbage, right? That's a negative. So we put that back to an affirmative. All non-garbage, okay? And then we give the compliment there about modern music. And Kangaroo comes up and she says, if we accept as true that all modern music is garbage, then what can we immediately infer about a band like For King and Country? And Logic Dragon says, oh, I love For King and Country. Their music is non-garbage, so they must not be a modern band. And there's Joel and Luke Smallbone down there, and they're saying, hey, mates, we just won Grammy Awards in 2020, so I don't know if you guys know that band, but they are a great band. Check them out, For King and Country. They're from Australia. They live here in the United States now, and they're a wildly popular band. So what you're trying to get out of the relationships of relevance is, another way to look at this is realizing that one statement may be what we call logically equivalent to another statement, okay? So when you take an initial proposition, whatever it is, and you chase it through one of the relationships of relevance, you can see that really there is an immediate inference that you can draw. Okay, again, remember, immediate doesn't mean fast, but it means automatic. And what you're really saying is that the last proposition that you come up with is logically equivalent to the first one. It's not stated the same way, but it really means the same thing. And that's what relationships of relevance are all about.